Alright everyone, welcome back to part 2 of my Kaldheim set review. Today we're going to be looking at the green cards that have been spoiled leading up to next week's release of Magic's new expansion, Kaldheim. So, yesterday we did white, today we're doing green. We're using the same scale to evaluate the cards. New staple cards are very strong for the color that they're in. We think that these cards represent the color well enough, and we'll see play in lots of decks utilizing those colors. Constructed playable cards, they have a place in some sort of deck and constructed regardless of format, whether that's going to be commander, modern, standard, what have you. It's a card that can be played in one of those formats in at least one deck. Limited playable cards are cards that are not good enough to see play in constructed, but will likely be average if not good in the drafting format. And then finally we have pack filler cards. And pack filler cards are cards that are so bad or so underwhelming that they will likely never see play in any format. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at our first green card. So the first one we're looking at is Sculptor of Winter. It's 1 and a green for a snow creature. So right away we are going to be seeing more snow permanents in green than we did when looking at white. But snow creature, and it's an elf rogue, and it's a 2/2. So what does Sculptor of Winter do? It says you can tap it and you then untap target snowland. This card is really kind of slow. It has a decent effect, but you also have to jump through the hoops that you have to have a snow permanent land that you tapped, and then you're also going to be tapping it. Like, sure, it's going to get you an additional mana, but you have to jump through what I feel like is too many hoops. However, if there is any sort of snow theme, snow tribal, snow heavily themed snow deck, most likely in standard, I think this might see play in it, because there's just not a lot of other really good cheap creatures that are going to ramp you mana in standard right now. In other formats, I don't think this could ever see play. This card is just so slow and it's so narrowly focused. But if there is a snow deck in green, most likely in standard, I think there's a chance that this sees play. So let's go on to the next card. Next card is Sarulf's Packmate. He is 3 and a green for a wolf creature who is 3/3. A little bit underwhelming for the stat line. This is the first green card that has Foretell. You can pay 2 in advance, and then you can play it for 1 and a green on a later turn, paying its Foretell cost. However, when this card comes into play, it draws you a card. And that alone, I think, makes it pretty decent in limited. We talked yesterday a lot about cards that cycle are really, really good in limited. Card draw is premium in the limited format. This card's not good enough to see play in constructed, but I think this is a really good card in limited. You get a 3/3, you cycle a card for 4. You're probably never going to foretell this card because, again, the foretell is not saving you any mana or giving you any real additional advantage. You're probably better off just playing this for 4 as a 3/3 and drawing you a card. Next card, we've got Roots of Wisdom, 1 and a green for sorcery. It says mill 3 cards, then return a land card or elf card from your graveyard to your hand. If you can't do that, you draw a card. And if you don't know what milling means, milling is a keyword that says you remove the top X number of cards from your deck and you put them in the graveyard. I think this is another limited card. I think it looks a little bit probably like a trap card. There are cards in green for the same mana cost that do the same thing but do not have the restriction and do not mill you. You could play a card for 1 and a green that lets you just get any spell back from your graveyard and put it into your hand. So if that's what you're utilizing this effect for, there's better ways to do it in constructed. However, in limited, pretty good. 2 mana, cycle a card. I think it sees play. Might even get you some graveyard recursion. Either way, I think it's playable in limited. Not good enough for constructed. Next card is Elderleaf Mentor. 3 and a green for an elf warrior creature who is a 3/2. So Elderleaf Mentor says when he enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. So Elderleaf Mentor is effectively a 4 mana 4/3. Is that good enough for constructed? Nope. Is that good enough for limited? Probably not even good enough for limited. I think this is pack filler. I think this card would be better in limited if it was just a 4-mana 4/3. And I still don't think that would be a fantastic card, but I think it'd be a lot more playable than it is like this. You might say, well, he's an elf warrior and he creates elves, so maybe there's some elf synergy. Elf elf decks and elf tribal decks have no problem with synergy already, and those decks are very low to the ground typically, and this is a 4-mana card that you're paying to get like 1 green elf token. Not good enough, and I think this is pack filler. Next card, Masked Vandal. 1 and a green for a shapeshifter creature. He also has the additional effect of Changeling, which means that this creature specifically has every single creature type in the game. So it can be any creature, it can be slotted in any tribal deck, and it would effectively, I don't know, if you're making a cat deck, this is a cat. If you're making a troll deck, this is a troll, for example. So that's kind of how that mechanic works. So he's a 1/3, and additionally he says when Masked Vandal enters the battlefield, exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do that, you can exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. This card is absurd, and I think it's a new staple in green. This card is Reclamation Sage, but cheaper, and on a decent enough body. You don't really care about the body in this card that much. Really what you're utilizing it is for its effect. But this card is insane. I think this card is so good. I think you're never going to have a lot of trouble paying the additional cost of exiling a creature from your graveyard and able to do this. That's almost always going to be utilizable. I just think this card is nuts, and I think it almost has no drawbacks in the payoff of not even just destroying, but exiling an artifact or enchantment your opponent controls, and it's on a creature, so you get a body. This card's nuts. I think this card is so good, and it's at a common. Absolutely insane. Next card is Mammoth Growth. 2 and a green for an instant that says target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. This card also has Foretell. You can pay 2 in advance, and you can play it later. It's instant speed for 1 green. This card blows. It's not very good. There are plenty of instant speed combat tricks in green that give the exact same +4/+4 and sometimes additional keywords for less mana. You could get the same effects for 2 mana a lot of the time. The only reason this card was printed so that they could stick the Foretell tag on it, and this card is absolutely pack filler. This card's not good. It's approaching the point where it might be playable and limited, but I think this is just straight up pack filler. Next card is King Harald's Revenge. 2 and a green for a sorcery that says until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control and gains trample. So that creature then must be blocked this turn if able. This is a really, really interesting card. I might be overvaluing this card, but I think it's possible that I could see playing constructed. If you are able to build a wide enough board, and then I think it sees playing some sort of combo where you can just make a lot of tokens, get a wide enough board, slam this on a creature, and you give it like +20/+20 and trample. At that point, it becomes a pseudo board wipe too. You attack in, your opponent has to block with everything, and maybe you attack with all your other tokens too. So everything has to block your big creature, and your tokens get in for lethal damage. You got trample on your big guy too. Anytime you play this, you're going to just be doing massive damage. So I think the combo potential for this card is pretty cool. Not quite to the level of being a staple, but definitely playable. And I think it will probably see play in some different decks. Mostly anything that's focused on getting a wide board. Alright, next card, Jaspera Sentinel. You pay 1 green for an elf rogue creature that's a 1/2. Additionally, it has reach, and it has a tapped ability that says tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. So this card's bad. Like, this card's really bad. There are so many additional, like, subsequent cards for the same mana cost and maybe not exactly the same stat line that just tap themselves to get you that mana ramp. This card, you have to tap 2 creatures to get 1 additional color. That is such a drawback. Why would you do that when you could play, I don't know, 2 Llanowar Elves, and then you could tap them both and you get 2 mana? If you play this in a Llanowar Elf, you have to tap them both and you only get 1. I think that sucks. I don't think this card's very good. I think it's pack filler. Next one, Icehide Troll. He's 2 and a green for a snow creature. He's a troll warrior 2/3. He has an interesting activated ability in that you have to pay 2 specific snow mana. So you have to tap 2 snow permanents. So when you do that, Icehide Troll gets +2/+0, and he gains indestructible until end of turn. Additionally, you have to tap Icehide Troll. I think kind of like what I had said before, if there, I should have put an asterisk here, I missed it. If there is a snow-based deck, this might be good enough to see play, and I think this card is probably fine in limited. This is a powerful effect. Anytime that you can, at instant speed, give a creature indestructible, don't underestimate that. It has potential. Sometimes it has potential in combos, sometimes it has potential in protecting you, sometimes it has, that's pretty much it. I mean, those are basically the reasons it would have potential, but there's probably a way that you could use this in a combo and utilize and capitalize on the fact that it gets indestructible. And if there's a snow deck out there, I think there's probably a way to implement a combo into that to take advantage of this ability. So, should have been asterisk, but constructed playable if in event there's a snow deck that can capitalize on this ability. Maybe I'm overvaluing that, or maybe I'm having too much faith in the community to be able to design around that, but I think it's possible. Next card is Notvold Recluse. 2 and a green for a spider creature with a reach, and he's a 4/2. That's it. I got nothing else to say about this card. It's playable unlimited because it's a 3 mana 4/2, and that's actually a pretty good stat line. The fact that it has reach probably never matters, but if you play a 3 mana 4/2, that's an okay turn 3 for you. Next card is a Guardian Glatewalker, 1 and a green for another shapeshifter creature. This one's a 1/1 with the changeling ability, and it also says when Guardian Glatewalker enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So I think this is a limited card. Maybe you could see play in some sort of like shapeshifter type deck. I don't know if those really exist, but if it did, maybe this could go in there. This exact same card was just printed. The only difference is that it didn't say changeling, or it wasn't a shapeshifter. And that card, I don't even remember the name of the card because it's unremarkable and it's probably not even that good in limited. But I mean, you play this in limited, it's not the end of the world, it's a 2 mana 2/2. Sometimes you can put the +1/+1 on another creature, make it just big enough that you can swing over the enemy. It's not the worst card I've ever seen, narrowly dodges pack filler status. Next one, we've got Glittering Frost, 2 and a green for a snow enchantment aura. It says, enchant a land, the enchanted land then becomes a snow land. Additionally, whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of any color. I do believe that can also be snow mana, essentially, because it makes it a snow land. I still don't think this card is great. I think it could see play in limited. This is the same. This card is essentially Gift of Paradise, but instead of healing you, it says it makes the land snow. Is that good enough? Probably not for standard. I don't even know if it's good enough in a snow themed deck because it's so slow. You can't play this on turn 3. I mean, you can, but you don't get the initial ramping, because you would have to enchant a land that you had to tap in order to play this. This shines more if you play it on like turn 4, and then you can tap the one untapped, and you can put it on the one untapped land and then tap that and make like maybe a 2 mana play. I just think this card's really slow. Gift of Paradise doesn't see play in any standard or constructed decks, and I think this probably has the same fate since it's essentially the same card. Next is Broken Wings. I don't even know why I need to talk about this card. This card has been reprinted to death, but it's 2 and a green for an instant that says destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. This card, again, this is another card that was just reprinted recently. This card doesn't see play in any format. I feel like, I don't know, WotC R&D is just sitting around, we're like, hey, we didn't hit our quota of 40 green cards for this set. Anyone got any ideas on what we can throw in there? And someone just yells, Broken Wings, as a joke, and now it's just a meme, so now it's in every set. Card sucks. There's way better alternatives. Next card is Snakeskin Veil. It's 1 green for an instant that says, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn. This card is unreal. It's just 1 mana, hexproof, and it gets a +1/+1 counter. Like, this could almost be playable if it just says it gains hexproof until end of turn, but you also get a +1/+1 counter on top of that. This card is Spell Pierce in green that gets you a permanent +1/+1 counter. That's insane. Spell Pierce was an insane card and saw play in lots of constructed decks, like blue aggressive decks use Spell Pierce all the time. And I have a feeling Snakeskin Veil is going to be used in so many decks. This card's nuts, and you only have to keep 1 green open to give any creature you have hexproof. Just imagine your opponent plays, I don't know, 3 or 4 mana single target removal, you're just like, oh, Snakeskin Veil, I win the game now, because that's so much tempo gained by playing this one card. Um, I think this card's unbelievable. You'll be happy to play this in limited and constructed, and I think it's almost an auto include in so many decks that use green. I think this card is just great. Next is Grizzled Outrider. So we went from the high of the Snakeskin Veil, and now we're getting met with Grizzled Outrider, who's 4 and a green elf warrior creature. That's a 5/5. That's it. It's got some flavor text on it. The art's kind of cool. It's an elf riding a bear. I got nothing else good to say about this card. This card's awful. It's like, I don't even think it's good enough to see limited play. I really just think it's pack filler. No, I got nothing else. I'm not spending any more time on this card. Next one is Ravenous Lindworm, 4 and 2 green for a creature worm who's a 6/6. And this one says Ravenous Lindworm enters the battlefield and you gain 4 life. This card's almost as bad as the card that we just looked at. Honestly, I said that it's limited playable, but I think it's so close to being pack filler it could go either way. This card is really objectively not any better than the card that we just looked at. Gaining 4 life is so rarely going to matter that it might as well just also say nothing like the Elf Riding the Bear card that we just looked at. I really don't think this is good, but if you have to pick it in limited, at least it has a big body. Having a 6/6 in limited oftentimes mean it's just big enough that your opponent's not going to have a bigger creature than you. So just because of that, limited, it's so close to being pack filler. Next card is Struggle for Skemfar, 3 and a green for a sorcery. It says, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then that creature fights up to 1 target creature you do not control. It also has a foretell. This card is interesting because the foretell actually saves you a mana. Because you pay 2 to exile it, and you only have to pay 1 green then to pay it for its foretell cost, which saves you 1 mana, because if you just straight up cast it, it costs 4. This card literally already exists. I think it was printed in... I don't even know what set that it was. But it was printed. I think it's out of standard now. I think it might have been Throne of Eldraine. There was a card called Outmuscle, which did literally exactly the beginning of what this card said, except it had the mechanic from Throne of Eldraine, which I think was like Adamant or something. This one I think is a little bit better because you can potentially pay this for 3 mana. And if you pay 3 to give a creature +1/+1 and then have it fight something, that's not that bad. I don't think it's good enough to play constructed because I think it's really, really slow, and there's way cheaper fight spells that you can play. But if you're playing in this in limited, you put the +1/+1 on, you trade over one of your opponent creatures, and that's a huge tempo gain. So limited playable, almost pack. It's not close enough to be bad as pack filler, but it's nowhere near close enough to be good in like constructed. Next card is Arachnoform. You pay 1 and a green for an enchantment aura that says enchant creature. The enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and also gains reach, and it inherits all creature types. So it gets that changeling effect that we saw from some of the other cards. I think this card is okay in limited. You're essentially just paying +2/+2 to give. You're paying 2 to give something +2/+2 in reach. Is that good? It's okay. It's not terrible. The fact that it gets changeling is probably never going to matter in limited, and I definitely don't think this card's good enough to be played in constructed. Like playing a 2 mana 2/2 with reach is never going to see play in constructed. Therefore, having to have this enchantment that you have to play on a creature you already have on the board, definitely not good enough. Next card is Horizon Seeker, 2 and a green for a creature human warrior. That's a 3/2. This is the first green card that we've seen that has the boast ability. So if we forget about what boast means from when we talked about it in the last review, when your creature attacks, you can pay the boast cost, but you can only do it if the creature attacked this turn. So if you do it, you pay 1 and a green, you get to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then you shuffle your library. Again, we also found out that you can only do this 1 time per turn, so that really limits the ability a lot. I think this card might be okay in limited. If this card just said, search your library for the land and put it onto the battlefield. Even put it onto the battlefield tapped. This card would be decent enough that I think it might see constructed play. But it's really, really slow, and the land you get goes into your hand. And I think because of that, it's not good enough for a constructed. Limited, it's not terrible. Helps you thin your deck out a little bit. Maybe it helps you hit your land drop. If that happens, you're pretty happy about that. Next card, Spirit of the Alder Guard. 3 and a green for a snow creature, Bear Spirit. He's a 0/4. So he says, when Spirit of the Outer Guard enters the battlefield, search your library for a snowland card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then you shuffle your library. So when you play him, you're going to tutor your deck for a snowland card, put it in your hand. Then he says, Spirit of Outer Guard gets +1/+0 for each other snow permanent you control. So what does that mean? Maybe it's constructed playable in that snow deck that we've been kind of hinting. I still don't know if there's enough support to make that deck work. But if there is a deck that's going to utilize this card, maybe if it's in like a mono green kind of thing. Regardless, if you're playing a snow deck, you're playing probably all snow lands. The set, spoilers, is going to have snow dual lands. All the basic lands are going to have snow. So you play this on turn 4 after you played your 4 snow lands. It's going to come into play as at minimum as a 4/4, as well as tutor you for another snow land you can play the following turn to make it into a 5/4. And that's also assuming you don't have any snow enchantments or snow creatures already on the board. I think this can come into play a lot of the time as like a 5/4 or a 6/4 that tutors you a land, and I think that's pretty good, especially in a deck that's themed around snow. If you're not playing this in a snow deck, this card's awful, and I don't recommend ever playing it. Next one, we're looking at the rune in green. It's called Rune of Might, which is 1 and a green for enchantment or a rune that says enchant a permanent. When Rune of Might enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So I think that's kind of a thing that's global across all these rune cards. They all draw you a card when they come into play. So they cycle immediately. This one says, as long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets +1/+1 and has trample. And if the enchanted permanent is an equipment, once that equipped creature, once you equip that equipment to a creature, the creature gets +1/+1 and has trample. This card is just objectively better than the one that we saw in white, because the one in white, I believe, was it just gave you lifelink. You didn't get a +1/+1, you just got lifelink. So I don't know why green gets the autumn. I mean, it's just white, and white's a meme, I guess. But the green card is just so much objectively better than the white one. I think that's ridiculous. I think this one has a chance to be playable and constructed because I think it is so much better than the one in white because of that additional +1/+1. And it cycles you a card when you play it. So you get +1/+1. Trample probably doesn't matter much, but you get to cycle it. This is cool. This is a great card in limited, and I think it might see play in a couple of constructed decks for the cycling and the +1/+1. Next card is Rootless Yew, 3 and 2 green for a 5/4 tree folk creature. When Rootless Yew dies, search your library for a creature card with power or toughness 6 or greater. Reveal it and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So this card is cool. You get a decent sized card. It's not great for the mana that you're paying, but it has a sort of ability that your opponent doesn't want to trigger. So your opponent's stuck in a hard place. They're stuck between, do I get this 5/4 off the board so it stops terrorizing by attacking me? And if I do that, my opponent's going to get an even bigger creature that they're going to be able to play and then terrorize with me terrorize me with as well. The issue with this card is I think it's really slow. I think it's too slow for most constructed formats. However, I think this card is unbelievable in limited. I think this is like a bomb. You slam this down, your opponent is so torn. Do they deal with this? Do they let it keep attacking them? Even when they do decide to deal with it, because they can't let it attack them anymore, you get an even bigger creature, assuming you drafted one. This card's really cool in limited. I just think it's too slow for constructed. So our next card is Path to the World Tree. You pay 1 and a green for an enchantment. It says when Path of the World Tree enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then you shuffle your library. That effect alone is an okay sort of mana fixing at 2 mana. I think it's a little bit slow, but especially if you're playing on like a budget, I don't think this is the worst thing in the world. But the card gets a lot more interesting because it has an activated ability. So you have to play 2 and Woober to then sacrifice Path of the World Tree. If you do that, you get to gain 2 life. You draw 2 cards. A targeted opponent loses 2 life. Path of the World Tree does 2 damage to any creature, and you create a 2/2 green bear creature token. So that's a lot of stuff happening for one ability. And I think if you're playing in a slower constructed format, most likely like Commander is the one that would come to mind. But I think this card's cool in Commander because it gives you a way to utilize all that mana you have floating around at the later stages of a Commander game. I think the issue with this card is it doesn't fit into a lot of decks because of the mana cost of the activated ability. You need all 5 mana colors in your mana base. So not every deck will be able to utilize this, but I think any 5 color decks that want to focus on ramping will be able to use this to great effect. Next card, Littjara, Glade Warden. 3 and a green for another shapeshifter creature. This one is a 3/3 with Changeling, and it says you can pay 2 and a green and tap this creature. If you do that, you have to exile a creature card from your graveyard. You then get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on any creature. You can only activate this ability anytime that you could cast a sorcery. I think that's so unnecessary. I think this card would almost be playable if you could do it at instant speed. The fact that it has to be at sorcery speed makes it so much worse. I think that this card is such pack filler because it's so slow. You're paying 4 for a 3/3. You have to pay an additional 3 mana, and you have to tap it, and you have to have 2 creatures in the graveyard to activate its ability. And you have, well, I mean, you can always just put the +1/+1s on this guy. But if you do that, you're not going to be able to utilize those +1/+1s a lot of times because you have to tap him again to activate the ability. So you're never going to be able to use him as a blocker because it's at sorcery speed and you have to do it on your turn. So I think shoehorning on the fact that this can only be done at sorcery speed makes this card so much worse. It makes it unplayable. Otherwise, I think it might be decent enough in limited, but I don't think it's really ever good in constructed. Next card is Boreal Outrider. 2 and a green for a snow creature. This one's an elf warrior. Man, the elves just like riding animals in this set. It's pretty cool. So this one's a 3/2, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell, if snow mana of... Hold on, I need to read this one over. This one's confusing me. Whenever you cast a creature spell, if snow mana of any of that spell's color was spent to cast it, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so if you play a green creature and you tap a green snow permanent to cast it, it gets a +1/+1. I mean, we keep talking about that snow deck. Is this good in that deck? Probably not. This is such a slow effect, and it requires you to constantly be playing creatures. You don't get any effect if you happen to play a permanent or a sorcery or an instant. You're not getting any benefit off of this. It only is triggering when you're playing creatures, so your deck has to be solely focused around having creatures. It just seems like a lot of hoops to jump through. If you can draft a snow deck in limited, I think it's going to be pretty good, because limited decks are very creature heavy to begin with, so you can leverage that ability a lot more. Plus, it's just a 3 mana 3/2, so it's not the worst thing in the world for stats. Next card is Blizzard Brawl. You pay 1 green for a snow sorcery. It says choose target creature you control, and then target creature you don't control. If you control 3 or more snow permanents, the creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until the end of turn. Then the 2 creatures that you selected fight each other. The wording on this card is really difficult to interpret, and I know when I was reading through this first, I was very confused based on the punctuation, because there's no commas or semicolons anywhere in here. So the fact that it says, if you control 3 or more snow permanents, the creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn, and then says, then those creatures fight each other. So I'm very confused. Like, if you don't control 3 snow permanents, does the card just do nothing? Or do they still fight each other, and the creature you control just doesn't get the +1/+0 and gains indestructible? I think that's an important differentiation to make, because if it just does nothing, the cards in 1 mana do nothing, which is absolutely horrible. If it's a green that just lets you have 2 creatures fight each other for 1 mana, That's a pretty good card. I mean, just a one mana fight spell is really not that bad. I think it just needs more clarification because I find the punctuation hard on it to interpret. But assuming that you just pay the 1 green and it's a one mana fight spell, that means it's really good, and I think it's probably playable and constructed. And if you're in that snow deck, it gets even better because it's a 1 mana fight spell where your creature can't die. So that's really strong. I think it just needs further clarification, and I think because of the way that it's worded and punctuated, it makes it really difficult to interpret. Next card is Finn the Fangbearer. He's 1 and a green for a 1/3 legendary creature, human warrior. He has Death Touch. He also says whenever a creature you control with that Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. And if you don't know, if an opponent accumulates 10 or more poison counters, they just lose the game. So this becomes an alternative win condition, which hasn't been seen in Standard for quite some time. Some people love poison, a lot of people hate poison. So this card is going to probably be met with a lot of contention. However, this card's busted, like really, really good. This card is going to be an awesome build around in Commander because he's a really good commander for any sort of poison type win condition deck. It'll just be interesting to see how this card is received by the community. I know a lot of people have been talking about it. You should also note that this card has Death Touch, and because it has Death Touch, it can also utilize the rest of its ability. So if you hit somebody with this card, they get 2 poison counters for that as well. You'll also be able to combine this with a card later in this review that we're going to talk about, and talk about how that interacts also. But I think this card is crazy good. It's going to be good in a lot of formats, and I think it's a staple in green and any time that you're trying to utilize poison to win the game. And it's a 1/3 for 2. Wow. Next card, Elven Bow. You pay 1 green for an artifact equipment. So Elven Bow says, when Elven Bow enters the battlefield, you can pay an additional 2. So basically, you just kicker it for 2. If you do that, you get to create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token, and then you attach this artifact to the 1/1. So effectively, you're going to be paying 3 mana for a 2/3 because the bow itself says equipped creature gets +1/+2 and has reach. So 3 mana, 2/3 with reach. Not good enough for constructed play, I don't believe. Probably decent and limited. You can, if you lose that creature, you can then re-equip this bow to another creature for 3, but that's a pretty high equip cost just to give something +1/+2. And reach, but like we discussed before, reach is usually pretty consequential. In limited, there's not a ton of flyers going around, and it totally depends on the meta. Maybe if you're playing a flyer heavy meta, I don't know, maybe it becomes a little better, but I don't think it's ever good enough for constructed play. Next card, we're finally getting into some rares. We've got Toski, Bearer of Secrets. He's 3 and a green for a legendary creature squirrel. He's a 1/1. So not very threatening for that 4 mana. However, he can't be countered, and he's indestructible. So this is an indestructible squirrel. He also has to attack every turn, but that's fine. I mean, you can't keep him back as a blocker, so it kind of sucks that you're not going to have that indestructible blocker unless you can give him vigilance or find a way to untap him. However, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage that's including Toski, you get to draw a card. So that's pretty cool. If you're attacking on any sort of empty board, it means you're just going to have this awesome card draw engine through him. He's going to be really great in Commander because you get to play your Commander on turn 4 as a 1/1, and he just basically never leaves the board unless someone makes you sacrifice him or exile him in some way. Another cool interaction is if you have him on the board, you wipe. You Wrath, you globally wipe the board, and then you get to attack and you get to start drawing cards again. So that's pretty cool. I think this is constructed viable for sure. There's definitely going to be some sort of build around with like a squirrel tribal deck or something like that. I just think this card is really interesting. Interestingly enough, there might be a way to utilize Toski as like a Voltron kind of carrier, because you just equip him and attach him with different enchantments and things, and your opponent can't usually deal with him because he has indestructible. So he's a relatively safe way to try to build as a Voltron target and try to make him bigger and try to win the game that way too. So I think there's a couple ways to build around this guy, and each one is pretty interesting. And I don't know, maybe I'll make a commander around him. He just seems really fun. All right, next card is Realm Walker. Realm Walker is 2 and a green for another shapeshifter creature with Changeling. This guy's a 2/3. He says, as Realm Walker enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. You can then look at the top card of your library at any time, and if the top card on your library is a creature of the creature type you chose when Realm Walker came into the battlefield, you can play that card from the top of your deck. So you don't have to draw it. So a cool thing about this mechanic is, since this guy is a shapeshifter with that changeling ability, he just fits into any sort of tribal deck in green. He doesn't have to specifically have that creature type because he can be every creature type. So again, like we were saying, I don't know, maybe if you're running a turtle tribal in green, I don't know, whatever it is that you're into, running tribal in green, you can just slot this guy in, and anytime you get to play a creature off the top of your deck, it's essentially the exact same thing as drawing that card and playing it. So you can almost read it as if like you get to draw a card, and as long as you play it that same turn, and that's a pretty powerful effect. Definitely a constructed playable card. I think this goes in a good number of green decks. Again, probably going to be in your slower formats. I don't think this is good enough for extremely fast formats like modern or, even standard to an extent. But slower formats, I think this card's cool and can probably shine a little bit more. So next card, we've got the Old Growth Troll. This guy is 3 green mana specifically for a Troll Warrior creature, and he's a 4/4 with Trample. He also says, when Old Growth Troll dies, if it was a creature, which that's how it comes into the battlefield typically, you return it to the battlefield. When it's returned to the battlefield, it becomes an aura enchantment with Enchant Forest you control. The Enchanted Forest then can tap to add 2 green. You can also pay 1 and tap it to sacrifice that land, and you get to return this creature to the battlefield effectively. God, this card is so hard to deal with. Like, it comes out as a 3 mana 4/4 with Trample, which is already fairly threatening enough. So it's beating you down. You finally get rid of it, and then it turns into an enchantment that your opponent just attaches to a land, and then it ramps them because now they tap their land and they get an additional mana. Oh, and don't forget the fact that they can just destroy that land and put this guy back on the battlefield, and then you have to go through this process all over again of having to try to figure out a way to deal with him. I think this card's really good. I think it's really good and constructed. I think it's insane. This is probably one of the most bomb green cards you can draft in Limited because it's just it's infinite value. Your opponent's never going to be able to deal with this in Limited. It has to be exiled. There's really no other way to deal with this card. Or it has to be discarded directly from the hand into the graveyard. But if this hits the battlefield, it's so hard to deal with. The only drawback of this card is it's hard to play in a multicolored deck because you have to pay specifically 3 green mana. But if you play it in a mono green deck, again, that's an inconsequential drawback. So I think this card is super good. I think this goes into a lot of decks. I think especially any sort of aggressive mono green deck, this card's really crazy. And the fact that you can play this sometimes on turn 2, if you get that one mana dork, man, you're gonna be beating your opponent down really fast with this guy. Alright, next card is In Search of Greatness. You pay 2 green for an enchantment. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with a CMC equal to 1 plus the highest converted mana cost or CMC among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. If you don't do that, you get to scry 1. So what does that mean for this card? So if you play this on 2, effectively at your next upkeep, it's not going to do anything really unless you had played something on turn 1, because this card specifically says it takes into consideration the CMC of other permanents that you control. So if this is the highest costed CMC card that you have to go down to the next lowest one. So another 2/2 or a 1/1. And if you can't do anything, at the very least, you get to scry 1 every single turn, which really isn't horrible. However, where this card starts to really shine, let's say you've got a 4/4, a 5/5, I don't know. You get to then look in your hand. Let's say you have a 4 CMC. You have a 4 CMC card on the field. You then get to look at the 5 CMC card in your hand, and during your upkeep, just play it onto the board for free. That seems pretty strong. Mana cheating is a very effective and powerful ability in Magic. I think the biggest drawback of this card is that Yeah, it says it specifically has to be that CMC. So if you don't have something in your hand that matches that CMC directly, it's just scrying one again. So it's you have to design around this a lot. Um, so this is a hard card to evaluate because I think if you can design around it effectively, it can go into a lot of constructed decks. Um, or in any sort of deck where you're drawing and tutoring a lot of cards, it gets so much better because you can tutor for that specific card. If you got the 4 CMC permanent on the board, you can tutor specifically for the 5 CMC cards that you can play during your upkeep for free. Like I think it's a build around. I don't think this card's good in limited, interestingly enough, because I don't think you'll be able to get the ability to trigger too frequently, and just playing this on tutor scry cards is not very good. Constructed build around though, probably decent. I think you can make this work if you're willing to put the time and the research into building around it. Next card is Elvish War Master. He's 1 and a green for an elf warrior creature who is a 2/2. So whenever one or more other elves enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. You can only activate this ability once per turn. He also has an activated ability that's 5 and 2 green that says elves you control get +2/+2 and gain death touch until the end of turn. So I think this is obviously going to go right into an elf deck. That's where this card shines. I think this card would be probably too broken if it just gave you a 1/1 every time you played another elf. So I think that was their way of trying to balance it. And I think that's an okay way to balance it, being only able to get one. Because this card would get really nuts if you played him and then you played an elf that makes another elf, so then you're getting 2 additional elves when you trigger this guy's ability, and you can just do that so many times, and it's probably a way to make it go infinite. Anyway, yeah, that would be pretty insane. I think if they actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think if they don't add that on to the end, when this guy makes the green elf warrior creature token, that token entering the battlefield would trigger this card's effect again, so it would inherently go infinite. So obviously they would have to word it another way to stop that from happening. Anyway, seems like a design disaster, but pretty good card. And then it has that way that you can just dump excess mana that you're going to have in those green elf decks so much to get the +2/+2 and death touch, and you can activate it multiple times if you've got, I don't know, 14 mana just sitting around and you want to give everything +4/+4 and death touch. That's an elf. So really good in elf decks, probably really bad anywhere else. Next card, Esika's Chariot. 3 and a green, legendary artifact vehicle. Says when Esika's Chariot enters the battlefield, you get to create 2/2 green cat creature tokens. Wow, that was a lot of words. That was tough. Anyway, whenever Esika's Chariot attacks, create a token that's a copy of target token you control. And you additionally this is a 4/4 if you crew it for 4. So I think this card is good because it's a vehicle that comes into play and gives you the power and toughness that you need to be able to accrue itself inherently. The reason that so many vehicle cards have been really bad in the past is that you have to bank on the fact that you already have a board, like a board state that you can play the vehicle and utilize your other creatures to then crew that. This can effectively crew itself. And if you're not even looking to crew it, just paying 4 for 2 of the 2/2 green cats isn't that bad. Plus, if you do crew it, you get to make more green cat tokens, or whatever other tokens that you might happen to have on the board at that time. So I think this card's cool. I think it's constructed playable for sure. Any sort of deck where you want to make tokens, this card's going to give you even more of those tokens. It's going to make tokens and then give you more copies of your best tokens. So cool card, probably one of the best vehicles we've seen printed in a long time. I also love the art of this card because I love the cat just like sleeping in the chariot. It's awesome. Next one, we've got our first MDFC legendary creature that's in the green colors. This one is Kolvori, God of Kinship on the front, which is 2 and 2 green for a legendary creature god. That is a 2/4. So off the back, you are paying 4 for 2/4. It has a static effect that says as long as you control 3 or more legendary creatures, Kolvori gets +4/+2 and also has vigilance. So if you can trigger that, especially the turn that it comes into play. You're putting it in play as a 4-mana 6/6. Is that good? I don't know. Maybe it is. Seems interesting. It also has a tapped ability that you pay 1 and a green. Tap her, and it says look at the top 6 cards of your library. You reveal a legendary creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So here with this card, it seems like it's implying some sort of legendary creature synergy, legendary creature tribal kind of thing. I'm going to look at the backside of the card before we make any judgment on it. The backside is the Ringheart Crest, which is 1 and a green for a legendary artifact, which says, as the Ringheart Crest enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. You can tap Ringheart Crest to add green. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type or a legendary creature spell. So that backside's not bad. It's a lot better than it looks. Because this is effectively a mana rock that specifically gives you green mana. So it's like the Moss Diamond or whatever that card is called, that you can only use to spell to play spells of that creature type or legendary creatures. So obviously a lot more limited than maybe a typical mana rock, but the fact that you get this tacked onto the back of Kolvori, God of Kinship, gives it a lot of utility. I think this is definitely constructed playable. I think this card works, pretty good as a commander if you're playing commander, because if you draw your opening hand and you don't hit, somehow if you're somehow in green and you don't hit any of your mana ramp or artifact ramp somehow, you can just play her on the backside as the artifact, and you can use that ramp ability as many times as you want until she gets removed. If inevitably she does get removed, then you just play her later as the Kolvori God of Kinship side. Maybe it comes in as a 6/6 and you can start, tutoring off the top of your deck to try to find more legendary creatures, because you play a lot of legendary creatures in Commander. I think this card is this card seems like it was designed specifically for Commander, and that's why I think it's probably only good in that format. But still, I think it's a playable card in that format. This card's pretty good and limited too. You'd be happy to pick it up. And I do believe, I don't think this is the last one. I think there's 2 more left. There are a few other green legendary creatures that I'm not going to be talking about in this episode because they are MDFCs, but on the backside they're multicolor. So I'm going to be talking about those cards when we do the multicolor part or segment later down the road. So I do acknowledge that there's a couple others, but we're going to be doing those later with the other multicolors. Anyway, so this is Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. He's 4 and 2 green for a legendary creature, a Phyrexian Praetor, who has Trample and Haste and is a 6/6. So at first glance, you're paying 6 mana for a 6/6 Trample and Haste. Is that good? That's not bad. It's really not bad. And then you're met with the additional wall of text that this thing has. So let's dive into this. Vorinclex says, if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. So if you haven't figured it out by now, this is the card I was hinting at before when I was talking about, I think his name was like Flynn, the new legendary uncommon creature who's designed around poison and that alternative win condition. So this guy pairs really well with him because you're getting twice as many of the poison counters. So naturally this is going to fit into any sort of poison infect type deck. But that's not all. This card has more text. So what else does this say? If an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, and it's rounded down. So if your opponent wants to say, I don't know, give a -1/-1 counter to one of your creatures, and instead it just becomes 0 because it's rounded down. So that's insane because half of 1 is 0.5. You round that down, it then becomes 0. Additionally, if they're trying to poison you, it's going to be doing half as much as well. Anytime they want to give you any sort of negative counter, it's just halved. And it's so hard to put counters on things in bulk. So often it's going to knock it down to 1 or 0, and that makes this card really effective. But there's so much synergy with the first half of this card of doubling the number of the triggers of the counters that you get. And obviously one of I don't know if it's an oversight or if it was intentional or what, but this will trigger when you play a planeswalker, because initially when you play the planeswalker, it will come into play with the number of loyalty counters that it says on the card, and then that will immediately be doubled. So that allows so many planeswalkers to just immediately get their ultimate effect off, and so many planeswalker ultimate effects are game winning. And they're kind of balanced around the fact that it's really difficult, if not impossible, sometimes to get those ultimates off. So being able to trigger them the turn they come into play, I don't know. This card seems like a nightmare. This card seems like a terror. This card is a staple card. There's no doubt about it. Assuming it doesn't get banned. I don't know. Wizards of the Coast been printing a lot of cards lately that have really been pushing the boundaries. They've had to ban more cards than ever. I think the only saving grace for this card not getting banned is how expensive it is, because it costs 6 mana. So comboing this with other things in fast formats is not going to happen frequently. But in your slower formats, look out for this thing, because it will destroy a game and probably your friend groups as well. And then the last card that we're looking at is going to be Battle Mammoth. 3 and 2 green for an elephant creature that has trample and is a 6/5. He also says whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you get to draw a card. So this card's really good as well, because it doesn't just say itself. This works on any permanent that you control. So you slap this guy on the board, he's immediately a big threat. So if they want to target this to get rid of it, you get to draw a card. If you play this and you already had another big threat and they need to get rid of the other big threat, they target that one, you draw a card. Maybe they have to target this one also later, you get to draw 2 cards. Anyway, it has Foretell. I don't think that matters, because as I've been saying, I don't think the Foretell mechanic is very powerful. There's not a ton of synergy for it, but I digress. We're just going to evaluate this card as the fact that it's a 6/5 for 5 with trample, and the crazy effect that it lets you draw a card anytime one of your permanents gets targeted. This is definitely constructed playable. I don't know if it's good enough to be a staple, but I think it's damn close. Without a doubt, though, this goes in a lot of green decks. And any sort of Timmy style decks where you're just trying to play out big stuff and you want to get a lot of value for playing your big stuff, this Battle Mammoth goes right next to all those cards, because your opponent's going to have to deal with those big stuff, and when they do, it's going to draw you cards so you can draw into more big stuff. I mean, very cool card. I like this card a lot. With that being said, oh, I lied. We have one more card. Surprise! It's Tyvar Kell. Tyvar Kell is 2 and a green, and he's a Planeswalker. He says he has a static effect that says elves you control can be tapped to give you 1 black mana. So he comes into play with 3 loyalty. You're going to need to get the 6 to activate his ultimate. So how are you going to do that? Well, you're probably going to want to +1 him. If you +1 him, it says put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target elf that you have. You get to untap your elf, and it gains Death Touch until end of turn. Additionally, you can pay his 0 cost, which means he doesn't gain any loyalty. He also doesn't lose any loyalty. If you pay the 0, he stays at the same loyalty, but you get to create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. So if you do actually get him up to up to 6 loyalty, so you can minus him, maybe this is a turn 10 play. You play your Vorinclex, you slam this guy down at next to it. He immediately goes up to 6 loyalty. Whatever. Again, I think that might be an unsight or an oversight. We'll see. So anyway, if you do -6 him, you get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn, and you draw 2 cards. This is an incredibly powerful emblem, especially in your elf deck. This card is designed to go right into an elf deck. It's no secret. It makes elves. It targets elves with its counters. It lets you tap your elves for more mana. And then if you do get this ultimate off, that's crazy. Every elf you play is going to draw you 2 more cards. The amount of card draw engine effectiveness this has is like through the roof. So this is definitely going straight into any sort of elf deck that you have. I think this card is so good. If you got 3 or 4 elves on the board when you play him, you pay your 4, you slam this guy down, and then you can tap all your elves to play more big cards. This card's really good in your elf deck for sure. So look out for this one, and do not let this guy ultimate. if you let this guy ultimate, without a doubt, the game's going to be over in like 1, 2, or 3 turns, because the amount of card advantage that player is going to get is going to be unbelievable. So unless I'm wrong, I think that is the last one. Yep. So thanks again for watching, guys. We did white, now we did green. I decided to do them in this order because that's kind of the order that my friends said was appealing to them. But if you want to see me do a specific color next, let me know. We still have to do blue, we have to do red, we have to do black, we have to do the colorless cards, and we have to do the multicolor cards. So let me know what you want to see next. I would like to save the multicolor cards till the end, but you know, if that's what people want to see, I'll be happy to do those next. So anyway, thanks again. I appreciate y'all watching to the end, and please stick around to check the rest of the reviews. Thanks.